We acknowledge the original owners of the land on which we podcast, whose stories were told for thousands of years. Today, we are recording in Meanjin. We pay our respects to elders past and present who may be listening. Sovereignty was never ceded. A quick note before we get started that there may be some swearing in today's podcast. If you don't like swearing or usually listen with children in the car, you have been warned. You're listening to What in the NDIS Now, a podcast where I, Hannah Redford, and my friend Sam Rosenbaum interview participants and providers about all things NDIS. This episode of What in the NDIS Now is brought to you by Astolti. Astolti is the software solution for NDIS professionals built by NDIS professionals. Astolti is my go-to software, and Astolti is trusted and loved by hundreds of other NDIS providers. I love how easy it is to use and how it keeps all my participant information, notes, and invoicing all in one place, available to me anytime from any device. Sign up now for your 14-day free trial. Head to astolti.com.au to sign up now. See for yourself how much easier managing all your NDIS business needs are by using Astolti. Thanks again to Astolti for sponsoring today's episode. Hi Sam, how are you going?
I am fantastic. Hannah, as always, how about yourself?
I'm excited to be down the Gold Coast on a beautiful day.
It is a wonderful day down here, and I'm very excited for today's podcast.
Yes, today we've got something a bit different. We're going to talk to a bookkeeper, and her name is Linda. Welcome to the podcast, Linda.
Thank you, Sam and Hannah. It's lovely to be here today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Not a problem.
I'm so excited to talk about bookkeeping and how to run a company from that side, because we all focus so heavily on the service providing side to our participants and clients that sometimes we forget that we have to there's some legalities to setting it all up. So we'll get to that. But as we always start the show is with, where did you grow up?
I grew up on the central coast of New South Wales, so around the Lakes District. So my backyard was a humongous lake, and I couldn't swim a stroke, neither could my sister, but we didn't drown, so it was all good.
Well, I'm glad you didn't drown there.
Was it a lot of doggy paddling in that case?
Oh yeah, like
get the floaties on.
Yeah, it was in the days when you left home and you came back when it was dark, and you just did what you did as a kid.
Gone are those days.
Unfortunately, yes.
They were. I was on the end of that cusp before it sort of started to change, so I did get a little bit of that, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah.
So how did you get into being a bookkeeper for NDIS providers?
So I've been a bookkeeper now for probably the best part of about 30 years. Yeah, that's showing my age. And I set up my company about nearly 8 years ago. And by word of mouth, I've had a lot of different clients. One of my clients is a consultant, and he had some clients that were NDIS service providers. And he called me up and said, I think you need to talk to these people because they need some help. And so that was my first foray into the NDIS space. And since then, I've got to understand the NDIS space a lot more. And so I've got probably about 7 clients, from people who are just a support worker who are working their own business, through to NDIS service providers that have staff and are providing support to about 150 participants.
That's such a great range of people and styles and all sorts of things. So let's start from the very beginning. To get started in NDIS land and in business land in general, you have to get an Australian business number.
Correct.
Or an ABN.
Correct.
So how do we go about doing that?
So an ABN it says to the government and to everybody else that you're actually running a business as opposed to a side hustle, or you're selling some bangles down the local market. You're actually going to try and work a business so that you can pay yourself and support yourself, your family, or your other people that are around you. So you get an Australian business number. You go online to the Australian Business Number Register and you go through the questions and answers there. And depending on your answers will depend on whether the government believes that you are running a business. So my best advice to people is have a chat to your local accountant. They'll be able to help you decide whether what you want to do is actually a business, or is it really just a little side hustle and you're just selling some bangles down the local servo or anywhere else. And it's not really a business. But if it is a business, then they should be able to help you set that ABN up, but also then give you some guidance about the other legal requirements for running a business in Australia.
Because there's a couple of different types of businesses that we can have in Australia. So we've got companies and sole traders, which are kind of the two primary ones as well that we have within this industry and sector.
Correct, yes. So usually a sole trader is a single person who doesn't want the legality of a company because that costs money. So to set up a company is typically about $2,000 for an accountant to set that structure up for you. And then there's some ongoing legal requirements for that. The accounting fees are they're more substantial as opposed to a sole trader. The accounting, as in like the bookkeeping for it, is nearly identical. Things are either an expense or they're an income, but it depends on the person and the particular circumstances for that person as to whether they should be a sole trader or a company, or there's this other nasty thing called a trust. But we won't get into that because that's a little bit more technical.
A little bit or a lot?
A lot. Funnily enough, a lot. But again, individuals should talk to their accountant to get some advice about what is the best process for them and their particular circumstances.
So this sounds like a good spot to ask about what is the difference between what you do as a bookkeeper and what an accountant does.
Right. So a bookkeeper looks after, generally speaking, the day-to-day running of the business. So they'll be helping you create invoices to your clients, pick up the expenses. So, you've paid for some product or some subscriptions, and they'll help you work out where they belong. An accountant looks after your tax at the end of the year. So they'll put together your tax return. They will also give you advice about the best structure. So again, whether you should be a sole trader or possibly a company or the other nasty trust. And they'll be advising you about the best way of dealing with your personal tax. So the bookkeeper comes in on the day-to-day business. They'll help you with GST if you're going to be GST registered as well. But they will, if you think of them, they're the ones your point of contact weekly, monthly. An accountant you typically see once a year, maybe twice a year if you're really super lucky. But they're historical data. Your bookkeeper is dealing with it on a day-to-day basis.
And getting that data in so that the accountant knows then what to do next with it.
Correct. So typically the bookkeeper will get your accounts into a position where the accountant can do their job and just produce your tax return and financial statements with a minimum of fuss, as opposed to, here is a shoebox of all my stuff. Accountants don't particularly like doing that, whereas bookkeepers, that's the space we play in, quite simply.
That's where I've gone wrong, the shoebox. Okay, so fantastic. That's a really great explanation. So when we're looking at the market and choosing a bookkeeper and an accountant, what are some of the red flags that we should look out for?
First of all, if you're employing a bookkeeper, they should be a registered BAS agent. So that stands for Business Activity Statement Agent. So they're allowed to help you with your GST, provide advice in regards to your GST obligations. They're also able to assist you with payroll if that's appropriate for you, because even a sole trader can have employees. They can't employ themselves though, but they can have other people working for them. A non-BAS agent, so just somebody who's a bookkeeper, may not be qualified, will most likely not be insured, and so they won't have professional indemnity insurance. So if they give you some wrong advice, you've got no claim against them. Whereas a professional bookkeeper who's a BAS agent will be a part of a registered association. They have to pay fees to the Australian Taxation Board, and they also have to keep up their professional indemnity insurance. They also have to do continuing education so that they continue to be up to date. A normal bookkeeper can be anybody. They don't have to be qualified.
Which you and I, Linda, we've been working for a while now, and we've seen some wonderful examples of questionable and not great advice. And that kind of comes down to the start of, I think, a individual's choice of going with the quickest and easiest or most locally available person.
I think that there's often, you don't know what you don't know. And most people would not know the difference between a bookkeeper who's a BAS agent and a bookkeeper who's just set up shop down the local home, or wherever. So they don't know what they don't know. So it's not wrong for them because they don't know that there's a difference. And if somebody is giving them bad advice, they don't know that that's bad advice, quite simply. So, we try and educate clients about, even on Facebook when I'm communicating with people on there, I'm saying, look, please just make sure that whoever you engage is registered BAS agent. Here's the link to the Tax Practitioners Board. You can check that yourself. That way you know that they're insured, you know that they're qualified, you know that they really should know what they're talking about, as opposed to somebody who says, oh, I've been doing accounts for 20 years. Well, that's great, but do you actually understand what you're actually doing?
And I think that's a really important point of making sure that the person or the professional that you're engaging with your business not only understand the wider legislation within their profession, but also understanding what you're doing as a business so you can get the best advice possible.
Correct. And so the best thing I always say to people is ask around, ask your other, people that you know, but always check whether they're qualified. It's the same as if you were employing a sparky or you're taking your car to a mechanic. You want to see that they're RACQ approved or whatever. That way that gives you some confidence that they actually know what they're doing. Or if something does go wrong, that you can take it back there and they're going to fix it for you, as opposed to taking it to some backyard mechanic and your engine blows up, you're screwed.
Yeah, it's very much like when we're employing a support worker and them just telling us they have a blue card doesn't mean they actually have a blue card. We've got to validate it.
Exactly, and the same thing, even now as BAS agents, we have to identify our clients now. So we have to see them, we have to view their director's ID, so even a driver's licence, and then we do company searches for them if they're a company structure. And so we need to make sure that they are who they say they are. And the same for my clients. They can see my certificates on the wall. They can check my tax registration as well.
Awesome. So that's for the bookkeeper. Are there some red flags for the accountant?
I think with the accountants, it's really important if you're in this NDIS space to have somebody who understands the nuances of this new and emerging industry. So if you can find somebody who has a lot of clients in in that space. It's like if you were a mechanic, you'd want to have somebody that understands your business of being a car mechanic. It's the same with the NDIS space. So when I'm trying to match my clients, I'm trying to find them the best accountant for that space, and that understands their industry. And again, I think it's the same thing for NDIS providers and workers, that they talk to the accountant and ask, do you understand this? What other clients do you have in this space? You don't want to be the guinea pig.
Very good points there. So once we've sort of got our ABN and we're registered and we're kind of getting the ball rolling, on the Facebook groups I see a lot is, how do I deal with timesheets, case noting, and then billing? Those are kind of different systems, and I think some people want that all in one fantastic unicorn of a software that kind of doesn't exist yet.
It does not exist yet at all. So unfortunately, in the NDIS provider space, if you have employees underneath you or you have other workers, then you're looking at 3 different systems, unfortunately. There's really not anything you can do about it. The best I've seen so far is 2 systems. So one that looks after your rostering and invoicing to NDIS plan managers or individuals if they're managing their own plans, or 3, and that helps with the payroll. So because you guys are under the Shards Award as well, which is the messiest award ever conceived by anybody on the planet, I am certain. It is super important that if you are employing people, that you make sure that you have a really good understanding of that award and the implications of that award.
Does anyone have a good understanding of that award?
Probably not.
Does the government understand it?
Definitely not.
But yeah, so we've had this problem as well in our business, and we've engaged with you to help us through it. But record keeping and reconciliation and ensuring that we've got our receipts, they're kind of some very fundamental basics that I think quite a lot of us, even some really big companies, kind of get wrong.
There's always been a misunderstanding about what records you are required to keep. So there's 2 things. One, if you're registered for GST, then you have to keep receipts for everything over $82.50. However, if you want a tax deduction for your $1 that you spent down at Officeworks, then you still need a receipt for that. So you basically need a receipt for everything. A bank statement is definitely not sufficient. There's always been this myth that says, oh, it's on my bank statement or it's on my credit card statement. That should be sufficient. It's not, and it never has been. But I still get people coming to me that say, oh, but my accountant says. I don't care what your accountant says. I'm going to go by what the ATO says, because they're the overriding person that is going to say whether you get a tax deduction or not. So we have some strategies that we help clients use, that an app on their phone that takes pictures for them, that then helps code, which means allocate the expense to a particular area, and we help our clients do that. And we've got clients from all walks of life, all ages, up to 84 is my oldest client, and they use this technology to help them, and AI helps us do this as well.
Yeah, it's quite a efficient little service. It's kind of helped, well, more me, because I hate keeping paperwork and stuff. I usually throw that at my business partners. Got to help themselves. But when we're sort of going through this process, is it okay for us not to have a record management system?
I would really urge people not to, although I have one client that we do everything on an Excel spreadsheet for them. So that's fine. He's only a very small business, but he earns quite a significant amount of money because he's a real estate agent. But he doesn't have a lot of transactions. So there's probably 20 transactions in a month. So rather than him having the burden of all that, we just run it on a little Excel spreadsheet. It takes me probably about an hour every quarter to do him. He brings in all of his receipts. We scan them for him as well. And so we've got all that documentation for if he ever gets audited by the ATO. So you don't necessarily need to spend a lot of money, but you definitely need a system in place.
Yeah, systems and processes go a long way.
Yes.
So you were talking a little bit before about GST, and I think there's a bit of confusion sometimes within the sector as where NDIS services are generally exempt from having GST applied.
Okay, so there's a difference here. GST is a goods and services tax, and we've had it since 2000, so we've had it for quite some time now. It is not exempt from the NDIS space. It's GST free. There's a difference. Things can either be a GST free, or GST exempt. And GST exempt things are things like when you buy a driver's licence, for instance, when you purchase your driver's licence, that is GST exempt. But when you as an NDIS support worker provide a service to an NDIS participant, it's GST free. So there's a real requirement to get the terminology correct. So it's a GST free service if they're an NDIS participant.
However, when we shop for our office supplies, say at Officeworks, that stuff has GST added to it. So it's often helpful if we are registered for GST for the sake of that. Is that correct?
Correct. So, well, there's a requirement. If your business is going to turn over, so total sales is over 75,000 for the year, or around about 6,000 per month, then you are required to register for GST, regardless of the fact that nearly all your income may be GST free. So that's a legal requirement. So you then get the benefit of then those GST credits. So yes, you put fuel in your car, for instance, because you're using your car for the business. Say it's $100, $9.90 of that is going to be a credit. So the government will give you that money back. So if you don't want to register before the 75, you don't get that credit. But you may choose to register because you will get that credit. But those are the questions you really should be asking before you set up your business.
Planning and preparation prevents piss poor performance.
We don't plan to fail, we fail to plan is a really good motto.
Yes, and I think that brings me to talking about going to Officeworks or whatever. Some of the things that you can definitely buy with the company money and things you absolutely definitely should not.
Okay, so regardless of whether you're a sole trader or a company structure, you really should set up a separate bank account for your business and what we call quarantine it off from your day-to-day personal expenses. So we never want to see your Spotify in there. We don't want to see your Amazon subscription in there. We definitely don't want to see your BWS purchases or your Uber Eats. We don't want to see anything in there that is not business related. Occasionally, even I have mucked up and used the wrong card. So it's not a big stress if it's like, oh, oops, I bought that coffee with my business card instead of my personal card. That's okay, we can deal with that. But we definitely don't want to see it as a matter of course. If you're a company, there are also some tax implications if you consistently use your company money for your personal expenses. So the accountant will talk to you about that and advise you. Of course, we can't stop you doing it, but we really prefer you not to.
And I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I hear is about buying like a client a coffee because you're doing a business meeting.
Oh, business meetings. Oh, how we love business meetings. So what the ATO say, and this is the way we approach it, is how did that expense contribute to your business? So, okay, you went and bought a new laptop. That's easy. You need a laptop to be able to run your accounting program, to be able to run your scheduling program. That's really clear cut. But coffee with a potential client or a long lunch really is probably not a business expense. However, if you had to travel, say you've come down to the Gold Coast here today from Brisbane, so your accountant may say, yes, picking up coffee and some sandwiches down here is a legitimate expense because you've travelled more than roughly about 50 kilometres from your home. So your accountant will always let you know about the deductibility of it, and we're always guided by their advice because everybody is different.
Awesome. That gives some really clear guides to get started, and I think gives people some really great questions for their accountant to start with, because sometimes I sit there and I go, I don't even know the questions I should ask, I'm meant to ask. What do I even need them to know?
That's always a good starting point. So once you've started and you've got a bit of idea about what you might want to know about, then that's having that conversation with your bookkeeper or your accountant. Your bookkeeper will always defer to the accountant because they're the ones who are going to let us know your individual circumstances, whether it's tax deductible for you in particular or your particular industry, because each industry can be quite different. And the NDIS space is also a very different and very new in all reality. It's only been going for probably 5 or 6 years with gusto. So we're all basically getting up to speed with a new industry, a new and emerging industry.
What is the difference between an employee and a subcontractor?
Right. The main difference between an employee and a subcontractor is an employee of your business. So even as a sole trader, you may have staff. For instance, I've got 4 staff and they're employed under a particular award to do a particular role, and they're either part-time, full-time or casual. And depending on their particular things is how much I have to pay them. A subcontractor is somebody who is running their own business. So a particular instance of this would be you're an NDIS service provider and you employ a consultant to come in and help you set up your systems. So they may be a sole trader, but they're running their own business. They've got their own insurance, they've got their own business cards, they're advertising, they're working for a number of different people. What we often find, however, is people believe they're a subcontractor. They've got their ABN through the ABN register and then think they're really running a business, when in actual fact, they're not. They're working for only one person. And the reason we find this often is because people, or the employer, for want of a better description, doesn't want to pay their super. They don't want to pay workers' compensation. They don't want to deal with having an employee and all the legalities required there. However, if you employ a subcontractor, you need to make sure that they are a true subcontractor. So, for instance, in the NDIS space, you employ Cheryl. Cheryl is a support worker. Cheryl has an ABN and Cheryl gives you an invoice at the end of the week saying she provided services to 3 different participants, 3 different days for 4 hours each day. She gives you an invoice for that at the end of the week. Because Cheryl has given you that invoice, it's based on an hourly rate. Cheryl can't send her best friend Louise to do that work because Louise is not qualified. The agreement is also that you have told Cheryl that she needs to go and see those 3 participants on those 3 different days between those particular hours. So in all reality, Cheryl is an employee for superannuation purposes. So even if she has her own insurance and she has her own ABN and she's working for other people, because she sent you an invoice based on hourly rates, you are going to have to pay superannuation for Cheryl. So you have some legal requirements there. And the ATO is really on top of this at the moment. There's $3.8 billion in unpaid superannuation for both employees and contractors or subcontractors, as the case may be. So they're really on top of this. And somebody can come back to you years later after you have not engaged them for some time and make a claim for superannuation. So unless you've got some really decent processes in place, it's a really minefield for people. So I would always advise, if you want to have subcontractors or contractors, talk to your accountant or your bookkeeper about it and make sure that you really are aware about your obligations.
Because it also, for people out there that are subcontracting in this matter, there's, within the GST component, the GST free point goes into there's a service agreement between the person providing that supports and the individual receiving the supports. As a subcontractor, you're not that person with the service agreement.
It depends on the service agreement and whether you're able to subcontract it out. So it truly can be a minefield. I've advised all my NDIS providers that they do not have subcontractors. Full stop. They just don't. Because I don't believe that I've seen one yet that was a true subcontractor.
Because then the risk that any employees or providers out there that start engaging in this or have been engaging in this is start getting into that sham contracting world as well.
Sham contracting is more so the fact that you have a contractor's agreement with them to avoid workers' comp, superannuation and the like. And you've deliberately done it so that you don't do that. Whereas you may have a contractor's agreement that is legitimate because, that person is running a business. You can have a contractor's agreement with another company. So your contractor's agreement may be with my company, and that's perfectly fine. But again, these are legal documents that a lawyer needs to draft up. You can't just grab this off the internet. And definitely not ChatGPT.
That's some really good hints, and I really appreciate that. Next, let's talk a bit about BAS, because we've talked a bit about how you want your bookkeeper to be a BAS agent. What the heck is BAS?
So BAS is a business activity statement. So once you're sending invoices out to your plan managers or your individual participants and they are paying you, you're getting income. Then you have to report that income to the government. So we do that via a business activity statement. So for instance, you may have received, say, $50,000 worth of income in this quarter, because they're done on a quarterly basis. But you may have had maybe $10,000 worth of expenses. Now, because your income is GST free, there's no GST to remit to the ATO. So you don't have to pay any of that money to the ATO. Happy days. However, because you've spent $10,000, you've bought a new laptop and you've had to buy a new desk and chairs and bits and pieces and other stuff that's got GST in it, you may have roughly $900 coming back to you. Why wouldn't you? So we do that via the business activity statement, and we prepare that, make sure the GST is being claimed correctly, and then we submit that to the ATO, and about 3 days later, the ATO will plonk that $900 in your bank account. Happy days. GST then that's not income. So then again, we need to make sure that we don't put that in the business as income, because it's just a GST refund.
So a little bit earlier we're talking about employees, contractors, and before that we're talking about the wonderful Social Community Housing Award, or SHADS. When we're employees looking at engaging and then starting to look at how we grade that role and where it sits, and as you were saying, earlier, it is the biggest minefield.
It's a disaster.
Where's the starting point?
The starting point is, funnily enough, for the Shards Award, is for the business to decide what stream they are running. So there's the disability services stream, there's the community support stream, and there's the aged care stream. So, for instance, Hannah, you may be in the community support stream, but you may have a client that's in aged care, and you may be providing some support to them there. Now, you would think that that employee then would be employed under the aged care stream. No, it goes under what your business is. So you would be then employing Sarah Jane as a community support worker under the community support stream, even though you're providing care in an aged care facility. This is why it's a disaster. So you start with, what is the business doing? And then that then tells you which stream it is, and then you look at the individual employee, what their qualifications are, what are they actually doing, what's their job description. And once you've got those, then you can make an informed decision about what classification they are under that particular award, under that particular stream.
And that still in itself is a very hard task.
It can be a very hard task, and like I say to most people, is employment contracts should be drafted by an employment lawyer. Again, I would never get something off the internet. It will not be compliant, and you are just wasting any money you have just spent, because they're just not going to be compliant. So you may as well have written it on a piece of paper and used it.
Sprinkle it with gold to make it worth more.
Well, yeah, because it's not going to be worth the paper it's written on, in all honesty. If it has illegal or unlawful parts of it, I believe that most of the contract would be voided.
Yeah.
So it's always worth going to an employment lawyer once you know what your classification is. The Department of Fair Work is very helpful here, believe it or not. So you call the Fair Work Ombudsman and they can give some guidance once you understand what stream your business is under and what the role and the qualifications of that particular worker are. And then you can call Fair Work and get some guidance in regards to it there.
Yeah, I think that's some very sound advice there.
Don't try and make it up yourself, is the biggest thing I can say. On the 23rd of August of this year, just to put it into context, the federal government is creating a new law federally called wages theft. It is a criminal offence as of the 23rd of August to either knowingly or unknowingly pay somebody incorrectly. So if you unknowingly do it, like you've mucked it up, then the fines and the penalties won't be as severe. But if you have deliberately done it, you could be facing criminal charges. So it is going to be really super important to make sure that all employers understand the award they're being paid under and make sure that they understand their obligations.
And if you've decided on a business structure, I'm of the understanding that even the director, if the director is part of providing service, they need to become an employee under that structure.
So under a company, so a company has directors, or maybe one director, might have many. And yes, an employee can be a director of their own company. But again, the government then says you need to employ yourself, for instance, correctly. For instance, I'm employed by my company and I pay myself a wage under the Clerk's Award because that's the classification I've chosen is most appropriate for me. Under your award, you may decide that you're a classification whatever it is, but you still need to document that. So you should still have an employment contract. You still are paid correctly. So you need to make sure that those documents and that procedure is still put in place. So you still have to pay yourself superannuation, you still have to remit PAYG, which is your paid tax that is withheld from your employer, from your wage. That still needs to go to the ATO, even if it's only you. And that's a big thing we find with a lot of sole directors, that they go, oh, I'm not paying the superannuation, it's only me, I don't have to worry about it. ATO doesn't look upon it that way. They go, no, you're an employee of your company because a company is its own legal structure. So if you find somebody that is having those issues, then they need to talk to their accountant or their bookkeeper pretty quickly.
Well, Linda, we've absolutely loved having you on the podcast, and I've been really looking forward to getting you on here and jumping into these wonderful questions, because I don't do tax or anything, as I've told you. I'm tapped out of dealing with a lot of this, and I get told what to do, and leave that up to the people in our business that do this well, and yourself, of course.
Yeah.
So the last question that we ask on the podcast is, in your ideal world, what would the NDIS look like?
Probably a little bit different to what it does now. I think it, like a lot of government initiatives, the intention is grand, and the people who are working in the space really have the participants' best interests at heart. However, government support for processes and helping businesses get their processes in place is really poor. And what I would love to see is when somebody jumps into this space, that they are given more support by the government to make sure that they do the right thing.
Because there's lots of people entering it and also lots of people exiting. It's a very weird space at the moment.
Again, because it's such a convoluted system, you have NDIS providers that are registered, some that aren't registered. Nobody seems to really know the difference between the two. And there really is very little support given to business owners in regards to making sure that they are compliant with their tax obligations, with their employee obligations. And again, business owners don't know what they don't know. They can't know everything. And I would like to see that when you first got an ABN, regardless, you were given a voucher to go and see an accountant for free.
Oh, I like that. Absolutely love that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming on today, Linda. Just for everyone listening, any advice that's been given today should be taken as general advice, and if you're wanting any further information, you should go speak to your accountant or bookkeeper, or go find a really good one like we've talked about.
Not a problem at all. And in regards to the legal stuff, you really should be speaking to your lawyers in regards to legal opinion.
Thank you so much. Until the next episode, we'll see you then.
Huzzah!
Thank you for listening. Please share with people you know. Until next time, as the Green Brothers say, don't forget to be awesome.